If you're looking for visionary conversations that push the boundaries of everything you thought you knew, welcome to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge, where every month, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer invites two leading authorities from distinctly different fields to engage in a deep dialogue focusing on the latest discoveries, information, and insights on some of today's most provocative metaphysical topics. Here's your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. As our environmental and spiritual crises deepen, nature's wisdom is urgently calling us back. But the question is, are we ready to listen? Joining me in this month's Conversation Beyond the Cutting Edge are consultant naturopathic physician, author, teacher, publisher, and energy and consciousness researcher Penny Kelly, and quantum plant alchemist Davyd Farrell, who bridge the mysticals and the practical with their profound insights and personal experiences of the critical connection between humanity and the natural world, from highlighting the role of nature in our collective evolution and exploring how plants possess quantum intelligence that can transform human health, adaptability to the often overlooked elementals that coexist with us. This two-part conversation will share ancient wisdom, spiritual truths, and practical steps to help us restore our sacred bond with the earth and rediscover what it truly means to be a human in a deeply interconnected yet imbalanced world. Penny Kelly, Davyd Farrell, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
What a timely and important topic this is that you two are going to be sharing with us today.
It is.
It is. So I'm just going to give a little background information, not a lot on both of you. It's going to be like the Cliff Notes. Penny, former engineer, had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening in 1979, which changed your life. It pivoted you to extensive investigation of brain, intelligence, intuition, and cognition. You trained in naturopathic medicine, published multiple books, and produced regular YouTube videos on consciousness, energy, humanity's history and future, and much more. So you've had some extraordinary experiences with other intelligences. And after I've introduced Davyd, I would like you both to talk a little bit about some of your extraordinary, experiences that you've had. But first, Davyd, politics graduate who turned into a plant alchemist, shaman with an Irish Cornish background. You're a trained spirit healer, geomancer, you mysteries initiate. You studied Tibetan Buddhism, taken teachers and empowerments from the Dalai Lama and other lamas and rinpoches, co-founded the groundbreaking Gateways of the Mind, Plant Consciousness, and the Shamanic Lands events, and you work with plant spirit intelligence in many different ways, offering plant transmissions, and of course you host lots of courses on plant medicine. So Penny first, ladies first, I'll let you, we're not supposed to be in that arena anymore.
That's okay.
Since your book was there right at the top, we will start with you and you can tell us a little bit about your experiences. I mean, what was the overarching one that turned you on to this whole other?
I think, without a doubt, that would have to be Kundalini. It's a massive event. The real thing is a massive event. It's an electromagnetic event. It rewires you from top to bottom, inside and out, and that changes your consciousness. And so I had unlimited consciousness, and I do mean unlimited. It was an awful thing, even though, I now teach people to expand their consciousness. It was very difficult for 3 years. In the initial Kundalini experiences, in that first 3.5 years, you don't sleep because consciousness never turns off. And so after a while, once you stop telling yourself how tired you are and start using your consciousness the way it's meant to be used, that's really when the real learning began. And that's when I said, okay, all right, here I am, wide awake. It's 2 a.m., it's 3 a.m., it's 5 a.m. what can I do with the rest of the night that would be productive, that would be helpful? And so you start doing things with consciousness that open your eyes to what the world really is, how it's really designed. And so that's really the biggest thing. Following that, once I got into the mode of relearning, it's a massive re-education experience about reality. Then it became exciting. And even though I was terrified most of the time, what happens if I do this? The curiosity was just, I couldn't put it aside. And so I just kept going. And I had a series of massages. Somebody gave me a series of 6 massages for a Christmas gift at a local clinic. And that was another turning point, because when you have a full body massage, one right after the next, you end up waking up the entire central nervous system the way it was supposed to be awakened at birth. And we don't do that with our babies. We wrap them up and, put them in an incubator and leave them alone. That's a terrible mistake. But that series of massages those were turning points. And the woman who was the massage therapist, I was telling her one day, I can't seem to stay in the body. And she said, oh, you should begin writing that down. Make a record of what you're experiencing. And so that was way back in, I think, 79, because the initial Kundalini was in February of 79. And this was the spring. And so I started writing stuff down right from the beginning. And it came out to be this massive, now 45-year record of my experiences and my thinking and my visions and my explorations in other reality systems, my meeting with people from elsewhere in the cosmos, repeated meetings, discovery of who I was and what I was doing here. So all of those, there's too many turning points to mention. But I was thinking, before we got on the program today, about what my life might have been if I hadn't had those experiences. And I think it would have been incredibly boring and very fearful and very dull, and would have contributed nothing to the society. And one of the great gifts I had early on was a connection with Don Juan of the Carlos Castaneda fame and teaching from him. I had some wonderful teachers. Oh my gosh. And he used to say over and over, it's all in the body. It's all in the body. And the reason you develop the body-mind system is to contribute something to the society, to make the world a better place. And that had a huge impact on me. And later that became a lifeline, because I was looking at the New Age stuff and thinking, what a bunch of warmed over Christian gobbledygook this New Age stuff is. And that it's all in the body, plus my science background, plus it's a system. The whole thing is a body-mind system. So those were some of the big moments where you go,
Thank you for sharing those. I'm sure we'll hear about a lot more in a minute. Davyd, let's bring you in here. What was the overarching incident that turned you in this direction? Because I know you've got this incredible background and you were brought up, your father was an archaeologist. You know all about, the earth, the planet. Yeah. You know so much, the history.
I was going to say probably the most significant thing was being born, but I guess maybe that's being a little flippant. As I was just listening to Penny's wonderful sharings there, I was just asking myself the same question. At which point did I significantly notice something changing? And I've kind of gone back over this many times because, like Penny, I've had lots of visions across time and space, timelines, past, present, future, and they kind of always had been with me since I was a child. And I kind of had shut them off for a long time because I would share them with people and people would say that I was crazy or that I should probably say those things. And mainly because they were often against authority also, that didn't help. And so I kind of came back to, I spent 10 years in the Middle East in the corporate world as a trade fair organizer, which at the time I thought was strange in my 20s, but I was successful and I did well. But most of all, it helped me to connect with lots of people, Arab people, Muslim people, Indian people, European people. And I'd have to, I guess as a sort of a sales sponsorship exhibition manager, I'd have to learn to communicate with them. And so when I look back on that now, as someone who's spent the last 10 to 15 years being a space holder and taking people through processes, when I look back to my 20s and saw that I was doing that for thousands of people with government officials and business people, I was like, oh, that was actually my training. And, you know, I also asked myself the question, why the Middle East? And the more that I've gone back into my own soul's journey and tracked it back through Egypt, Sumeria, and other ancient timelines, it's like my whole life has just been a repeat of many other timelines. And now, having broken this Davyd down a little bit, it's all significant. There's not a single part of my life that doesn't have some resonance to something else important. And so I've kind of come to view myself almost as a fractal avatar, having a mirrored experience that my soul has had on many other occasions, which sounds kind of far out, but that's basically, you know, where I'm at in this moment. And, you know, if I think back to my time in India after living in the Middle East, particularly up in Dharamsala, where I spent, you know, about 6 to 8 months going really, really deep into Tibetan Buddhism and meditation. And like you said, taking elements from many lamas and Rinpoches, and then being guided to spend 2 years at a monastery in Italy after that. And so, you know, that then opened the door to the world of plant medicine and shamanism. And this was way back now in 2012. And I met the powerful jungle spirit, ayahuasca, and that radically changed my life. She asked me to move home to Britain and then came back and started all of the events that you said. And that was also the first time that something came to me and said, hey, remember that idea that you had a few weeks back about the intelligence of plants? You need to make an event about it because it's going to be really important. And we, the plants, decided that you're going to be one of our emissaries to communicate this with the wider world, which is basically what I've done for the last 12 to 14 years, I guess, in different ways. And, you know, through that particular experience, although when I look back now, I see that I was doing the same thing as a child already, a lot of time in nature, often by myself, talking to fairies, talking to rock beings, pretty much anything that would listen to me as a kid, to be honest. You know, I kind of look at all of these moments now and see that really there is no start or stop point. It's just a continuation of the same energy that I can perceive better now than I could perhaps at the time. And you know, those initial ceremonial experiences with those wonderful teacher medicines then opened me up to the possibility of the medicine of all plants, which then took me, as you would particularly know, Sandy, on a journey deep into the world of plant intelligence and understanding that these things that grow like the dandelion in the cracks of the pavement are actually incredibly powerful, multidimensional beings who have come to share with us bodhisattva style, as we would say in Buddhism, all of their gifts, their healing and their wisdom. And what do they ask for in return? Simply that we don't spray Roundup on them, which I think is a pretty good deal for most of us, not so much dandelion. I mean, this is the thing, you know, if we think about these plants as beings, we can see the dandelion has been at war with the lawnmowers and the Roundup for about the last 50 years, God bless him, you know, so, but also this is a way I think really that we share of helping people to remember the inner child, not because it's fanciful or imagination, but because we know that these quantum plant intelligences actually work. And we have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people now who've been through processes with quantum plant healing with myself and Bella and other people who have now realized that dandelion is a key marker for synchronicity. And if dandelion suddenly appears in your awareness, you need to pay attention because he's all about divine timing. And that opens the door to fifth dimensional experience because it makes you present, keeps you in the moment. Plants are incredibly good at keeping you in the moment. And the more you're in the moment, the more that you start to see, and the more that you start to see, the more you see the synchronicities. So I've kind of, with dandelions, experiencing my whole life as a series of synchronicities. So hopefully that wasn't too roundabout way of answering that.
Well, I know you both talk to elementals and you both talk to plants and goodness knows, as you said, rocks and everything. And it's very difficult for people like me who don't, you know, to imagine that I possibly could. So I want to know a little bit, Penny. I know that you had a wonderful encounter with an elf who actually taught you something that certainly improved your finances, even if it didn't improve anything else. Davyd, you know, give us one experience from both of you, you know, of an encounter that did something dramatically different for you. So, Penny, you start.
I think the thing that triggered the encounter was the Kuwait War. I had an 18-year-old son at that point in time, and I was terrified that they were going to draft him and send him over, you know, across the ocean to kill people. And I did not like that idea. I was frantic about that. And I was trying to keep my cool, and I wasn't doing very well. And I went for a walk one day, and I was so frustrated that I had just read a book by somebody that I thought was crazy in spite of the Kundalini, that I was having and dealing with. And people were saying, "Are you nuts? That's not possible." Oh, yes, it is. But I had read this book about plant energies or plant consciousness. And so I'm walking toward the back of my farm, which is not a huge farm. It's only 57 acres. And I got frustrated and said, if there's anybody out here, say something, because I needed somebody to take my mind off, or something to take my mind off the fear of what was going to happen with that Kuwait war. And I heard this voice, and I stopped for a minute and, looked around. It's like, is somebody following me? And then I heard it again. And long story short, it was a group of elves that live on the farm and had been here long before I got here. And we started this conversation. I ended up making a deal with them. The deal was for 100 tons of grapes, because we had vineyards at that point. Then we maybe got, I'm going to say 17 to 20 acres. 20 acres would be a bumper crop for us. On average, 34 acres, 4 tons was the all-time high, but the average tonnage was 17. And so I said, after the conversation, I'll tell the world about you if you give me 100 tons of grapes. So we made this a deal. And I had one really rough lesson after the next, not only about myself and my perspective of the world, but of working with plant energies. It took me a while. I was actually doing a radio program, and somebody said, it was a call-in show, and they said, well, what are elves? And I was stumped. I was like, well, so I went back to the elves, the group, and said, somebody asked, what are you? What do I say? And they said, well, tell them we are the intelligences that manage your plants, your trees, your flowers, your whatever you're growing. And we've only presented ourselves this way so that you'll know somebody is out here to work with, or something is out here to work with. And I was just stunned. I thought, oh, so then later, after I thought about that, I went back and said, okay, so present yourself some other way. And they did, 2 other ways. And I was really shocked at that. But that relationship began in 1990. It's now 2025, and that relationship is still going on. So we still communicate. We learn to communicate with everything. I don't care if it's a bug. I don't care if it's a pebble. I don't care if it's the car tire on the car driving down the road in front of me that looks like it's wobbling pretty badly, or it doesn't matter what, I communicate. So yeah, that's one of the things about everything is alive, and everything has some form of consciousness, and it's not human consciousness, but it can be communicated with if you reach out, and it will reach back.
So David, tell us about, one really mind-blowing encounter that you've had.
Well, thank you, Penny, for sharing that, because as you were saying those words, it was kind of reminding me of some of my earlier experiences. And you said something really important, and I think that is worth reiterating maybe in a different way, is that these plant intelligences, nature intelligences, they will communicate with each and every one of us in a way that is most appropriate to us. Now, there may be some commonalities across all humans and that we can understand things in a certain way, but very early on in my much more conscious interactions with these intelligences, and like you said, Penny, I had a wonderful teacher called David Leasley, a wizard from the Isle of Man, who taught me magic and how to work with these different types of intelligences. A really wonderful man. And he said, always remember, David, that everything has consciousness, everything has the presence of great spirit in it, and you can communicate with it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. What about this table? How am I going to communicate with that? And so he said, remember that this used to be a tree, and you can communicate with the spirit of the tree, which is still present in the table.
Yep.
And I was like, I have to be honest, it took me about 4 months to integrate those teachings. And this was after many other shamanic teachings I'd already had, but it kind of took me to the next level and made me really appreciate that everything around me, particularly that was in the natural environment, was sacred. And a little bit like Penny, I had an experience. There's been so many, I was trying to find the one that was most suitable. But one of the funniest ones I had was when I lived in Wales and had just returned back actually from living overseas in Italy and been in this new place in Wales near Abergavenny for about 3 to 4 months. And they decided to build a bypass through the wonderful Clydach Gorge, which had a history, interestingly, of witchcraft and many other interesting beings. And so in my heartfelt love for nature, I put out a call and said, if there are any nature spirits that are out there that have just been basically, kicked out of their homes by this bypass, then, hey, I invite you to come and live in our garden with us, which seemed at the time to be a great idea. And when I shared this with one of my other teachers, he's like, oh my, no, you did what? Well, anybody could turn up. Which is not so much what happened. So about 3 or 4 days later after this, we were doing some sort of meditational ceremony in our house. And this almighty racket kicked off in the kitchen next to where and then the lights started flashing on and off. And I was just like, my ex who was with at the time said, I think there's an energy in the kitchen that we should go and investigate. We were already reasonably sensitive at this point. And we went in and I closed my eyes and I saw this rock being that was underneath the sink because the sink had got blocked. That was the other weird thing. The sink had got blocked the day before and we couldn't get the water to drain. I took the sink apart. I couldn't work out what was going on and it just kept filling up with water. Anyway, I came across this rock being. I can say he was some sort of troll, or that he was very insistent he wasn't a troll. He said that he isn't a troll. He's something different. He was very clear about that. He ended up being called Grumpy, and he ended up living with us for about 6 months. It was a very interesting process because there was a palpable presence that took residence in our kitchen. And it would sit at the kitchen table, and it would turn the lights on and off and ask for whiskey sometimes. Which I was only to oblige until on one particular occasion when we were doing some meditation work, we realized that there was a big commotion kicking off in the kitchen. And I went into my inner space and I saw that he'd invited all of his relatives into the kitchen and they were having some sort of troll party, which wasn't anything that we'd agreed to, as I then had to reassert the boundaries. But this all sounds kind of make-believe. But to be honest, what really did it for me was that after seeing this being, I said, hey, like, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I need somewhere to live. And I heard that you offered some of us a place to live. So here I am. What next? And I said, well, I can't have you turning the lights on and off and demanding whiskey all the time. This isn't going to work for us. So we need to come to some arrangement. So in the end, what he actually agreed to do was to unplug the sink. And so I said, okay, I'll give you till tomorrow morning to unplug the sink. And I went down the following morning, the sink wasn't unplugged. And I said, hey, Mr. Grumpy, why is the sink not unplugged? And I heard this, whiskey, I need whiskey before it's unplugged. So I literally poured a tumbler of whiskey, put it on the table, and the sink drained instantly, literally instantly. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not just me going loco. This is actually something real. So, it's very similar to Penny's story, really, in many ways, perhaps with some humorous anecdotal side aspects to it. But at the same time, it really opened me up to the possibility of not discounting all of the things that I kind of had already encountered earlier in my life. But due to conditioning, becoming an adult, becoming boring maybe, and all of those other things, I'd actually kind of had dialed that frequency out a little bit. And it was that particular house in Wales that had a long history of magic and I think witchcraft before we'd lived in it. And so the house was already imbued with that energy. And having done a lot of and a lot of meditation work by that point, all I really had to do was plug myself into the brain and access the information, which by working with sacred plant medicine wasn't too difficult really. And from that point forwards, working, one of the first things that happened immediately thereafter was that the plant Artemisia vulgaris came into my life, mugwort, which was also through a very interesting synchronistic turn of events, which is probably a bit too long to share here. And she became my first teacher guide in the world of what I originally called plant spirit work, but now I tend to refer to more as quantum plant intelligence. And she really has been my guide ever since, along with, I can say, hundreds of other plants. But to this day, I still work with mugwort for dream work. I still work with her clearing my own energy field, and to clear other people's energy fields. Very, very good against low frequency, we would say bad magics and stuff like that. And she taught me how to identify the frequency of all of these things in my inner awareness. And as Penny said, most of all, in my body. She really started to help me identify, why do I get a stomachache when certain frequencies are in somebody's field? Why do I get the fogginess? Why do I go cold and start shaking? And so she taught me about the differences of frequencies and what each frequency often represents, at which point I would start to get visual. So it's a kind of a process, Andy, to come back to what you originally asked. But I think we all have this ability innately. But if we're looking to meet maybe an extraterrestrial outside of our front window in the morning, I think we might be a little disappointed, because most of my ET experiences, 99% of them have been in the astral planes. Very powerful, very definitely extraterrestrial intelligences, good and bad, but it takes a lot of energy for these beings to actually manifest into our realm, or at least it used to. So I think a lot of it's just about readjusting, Sandy, how we feel the frequencies and how we let them speak to us with our own inner lexicon. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think this is the point at which I say to people, hey, don't try this at home. They've really thought it through. Yeah. What I want to know is, we have lost our connection with nature. Our ancestors had this amazing connection with nature, completely kind of dissed it over the years. Why is reconnecting with Mother Nature so critical, so essential for our spiritual, personal and collective evolution, and really important at this time? So I don't know which one of you wants to go. This is a free-for-all.
Okay, I went first before. You go first. You go first this time, David.
Oh, you know what? I think the most important thing, to keep it short and sweet, is that it reconnects us to the immediate environment, and that connects us to the present moment. One of the most important things that plants in general have told me is when I've been in the garden planting seeds and potting and making medicines. Because if my mind, particularly when I was making essences, if my mind went to what was on the news, something from the email, bad this somebody, I was going to put all of that into the medicine. And so I learned very, very quickly from making my own medicines and then testing them, particularly with sacred plant medicine, just how good or bad those essences were. And I had a whole range of bad ones that I made. Believe me, they didn't fare so well. And so I then became much more precise and tight, more present, that when I was making a plant medicine, I was only with the plant, but also observing what was going on around me, listening to any sounds that would come in. And so this was really, as I came later to understand the first teaching from Dandelion, which is be present, and you will understand that everything that you need to know is already in the field around you. Maybe literally a field, but the energy field also. And so I think by reconnecting to nature, Sandy, it reconnects us into the present moment, which is, I think, the only thing that truly exists. So it's that important.
Yeah. Penny, that was very concise. So you've got a couple.
Okay. I don't know that I can be quite as concise, but we need to reconnect to nature, because we are extensions of nature. What we're doing out there, we're doing in here. And we're about to get the results of our machinations here. We're already getting the results as far as I'm concerned. But that's one reason. The other reason is because that's where all the secrets are. I spent 15 years working with Dr. Levengood in the lab studying plasma science, plasma physics, and he was mentoring me. And what you begin to understand is that nature has all the secrets. There's a story I could tell about his question, looking at trees and saying, how the heck do they get water to run up that tree against the force of gravity to nurture and feed those leaves and minerals and what all ever other stuff trees are sucking up from the ground? How does that happen? Well, if you understand plasma physics, you understand the basis of everything involving levitation, all kinds of free energy. Plants are already using that, and we're not. And we're still fiddling around with fire and rockets and fuel and stuff like that. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, we're going to have to reconnect in order to learn the secrets, in order to expand consciousness enough to be able to get off the planet and join the greater community. And that's what plants teach us. There's not a lot of plants in some other systems, some other planets. This one's rich. It's really rich.
We think of ourselves as the superior ones here on this planet. We think about a troll, or we think about an elf or a fairy or whatever, and yeah, okay, they're sweet or they're not, but they're over there.
Yeah.
And we are way beyond them. And when you look at it in that respect, just as you are both talking, and for the first time, I could actually see that lack of connection and what a big division it is. and what we are missing by having so much arrogance.
I know.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's really sad.
Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and joining me today in a discussion of why our collective evolution depends on aligning with the plant kingdom, the elemental realm, and natural forces of nature are consultant naturopathic physician, author, teacher, and consciousness researcher Penny Kelly, and quantum plant alchemist Davyd Farrell. Still to come, the healing potential and the transformative power of plants, and how you can learn to communicate with them. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Penny Kelly, Davyd Farrell. So, the healing potential and the properties and transformational power of plants. Tell me how do plant-based medicines compare to conventional treatments that we have today?
They're intelligent, and they don't have the miserable side effects that a lot of other stuff does. And if you're using the right thing, the right essence or whatever you want to call it, then the body sets up its own relationship and you can have some input into that relationship. It becomes a three-way thing. You kind of separate yourself from your body a little bit, enough to look at it and say, okay, what do you need, guys? Meaning all those cells and all those tissues and all those organs, and they respond. I've been stunned at the power of natural medicine. There's no comparison.
Davyd?
Well, yeah, I definitely 100% agree with Penny on that idea. And also, I'm just going to share a couple of experiences. One that I often share, but I think kind of exemplifies the point. And it's working with the elderberry medicine, or what we would call the elder tree, which is a very sacred tree, which actually, certainly in Celtic times, through Brythonic law, it was actually punishable by death to chop down an elder tree. And when you understand, first of all, who the spirit of the elder tree is, and you understand that she's a manifestation of the crone or the calliope, the queen of winter, you also understand that she's a psychopomp who really sits at the veil between the worlds, carries spirits across the world. She's one of my two psychopomp allies. But also, this medicine is a neuroimmunomodulator, which is a very, very fancy way of saying that this is a powerful spirit that can actually scan our field and talk to us, bypassing our monkey mind, our brain, and talk to the cells and organs in our body and say, right now, what does he really need? Does he need to purge? Because the elder medicine can make people vomit. Does he need to maybe purge through the lower pathway? Because it can also give us diarrhea. Or maybe he just needs his immune system being boosted because it's coming into the cold winter months, which in a beautiful nature way, nature always provides the medicine when we need it. So the elderberries appear around about mid-September, certainly in Britain. And I would always go elderberry at the same time, which was a beautiful experience. I would make it ceremonial. I would connect with the spirit of the elder tree whilst I was taking the berries. So this is where I'm saying, Sandy, when we want to connect with trees and plants, well, at least I did. I went through hundreds and hundreds of foraging processes, being very present with the plant, meditating, testing the medicine, putting all of that co-creation into the medicine, and then testing the medicine on myself in a variety of different ways to see what would happen. Very much the same way that Edward Batch did many, many moons ago with his flower essences. He came to understand what the medicinal intelligence of these plants were by making the essence, which is quantum really, contained and held in water, and testing it on himself and seeing what the reactions were that came up. I'd done the same thing. I poisoned myself more times than I cared to think about. But I had a very powerful experience once with henbane. And
my.
Yeah. I remember I was in the garden with the plants and I was just transplanting seedlings from one pot to the other. And my partner came out and said, don't you think you should be wearing gloves, Davyd? Because this is a toxic plant. So I was like, don't worry about it. I've done this lots of times before. Never had any issues. And about 20 minutes later, I started to feel very strange. And I was like, oh no, I think I might go to the hospital. At which point I was like, maybe I need to go and drink tobacco because it's purgative. And suddenly the words of my partner were like, oh my God, maybe henbane's going to kill me. At which point, this very, very clear external voice to me said, I'm not going to kill you, idiot. I want to show you how my medicine works. It's not, you're no good to me dead. I need you to understand my medicine and share it with other people. I've had this experience with quite a few poisonous plants, another one being the yew tree, very, very toxic tree, apart from the arrow berries, which you can eat, but the rest of the tree is poisonous. And I even ate a mushroom once, a chicken of the woods mushroom off a yew tree. That I didn't even think twice about. And then I ate it with butter and garlic and black pepper, and it tasted amazing. And I shared the story with a friend a few days ago, and I said, you ate a mushroom off a yew tree? Like, are you feeling okay? I was like, yeah, I feel fine. Why would I not feel fine? And the thought had never occurred to me that the tree was toxic and poisonous, because that's not how I view the tree. So it's a very, very, and by the way, I'm not saying go out and eat any more yew tree medicine, because I wouldn't, but then it comes to pass that I learned that the yew tree actually is used in Taxol, which is a way of healing cancer. When I started to look more into the quantum plant intelligence of trees and plants and started retro-engineering backwards into the quantum field from their herbal attributes, I suddenly started to understand a lot more about toxic trees, poisonous trees, and how the best way to understand it is through direct experience. And if you're truly in a place of trust with these intelligences, they're not going to kill you. Because I was like, well, how come one person I know ate a whole bunch of yewberry seeds and basically went to hospital, and I had a whole mushroom that growed off a tree and didn't feel anything? And then that took me into the world of the Buddhist lamas who used to talk about how to alchemize poisons in the body. So that then became a major focus for me for many years, about understanding how to isolate energetic poisons in the system, which became very, very useful, as you can imagine, in 2020 and 2021, when we started having our systems being quite heavily invaded by external intelligences we hadn't invited in. And so very quickly I understood why I'd been through all of this training and had learned to identify poisons in my system, isolate them, and then extract them, normally through purging. And I was like, oh my gosh, then all of the stuff from the Buddhists came back. So I started to get this new picture of how plants and trees wanted to us. And I definitely wouldn't recommend this path to everybody. I've had lots of very strange experiences, but at the same time, I also learned about how plants are really not just the trees that we perceive. They are these incredible universal beings who want to talk to us. And all we have to do is show up. First of all, open up ourselves, open up our hearts, and get our heads out of the way. And if I come back to the example of the elder tree, I came to understand just a few years ago when somebody in the village I lived in chopped down all of the elder trees literally 2 days before I was going to make the medicine. And I suddenly understood, this was actually, I think, in 2021, when many people were getting sick. I suddenly understood why the ancient laws said you shouldn't chop down an elder tree, because that medicine that should have supplied the whole village to actually combat the things that they were feeling sick from suddenly had gone because somebody had chopped the trees down. I definitely had a few tears in my eyes that day. Thankfully, the trees grew back and it wasn't the disaster that I had originally thought. But it really highlighted to me the disconnection. And I was like, why did somebody chop those trees down? And I found out who it was, and I asked them, and they said, oh, because I didn't like the straggly nature that they had, and they were obscuring the view of the field. I'm like, that's it? You just chopped down all of the medicine in the village? So,
it's interesting. Nature doesn't waste anything, and there's a purpose for everything.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, why are we here? Because sometimes you look at what we do, and, we are working against nature all the time.
Against ourselves.
Against ourselves. So what is our purpose? What were we put here to do?
Wow. That's a big question, Sandy. Depending on your point of view and how in tune you are with yourself, everybody's here for a reason. And there's a million reasons. Well, there's 8 billion, to be a little more specific. Some people are just here to gather experience. The whole thing is really about gathering experience. And when you come to a reality system like this one, which is really complex and full of DNA and full of living plants and people of all sorts and so many different elements, what you begin to understand, if you're looking, if you're asking, is exactly that question. What am I doing here? Leads to having to kind of poke around inside yourself to ask yourself, what am I doing? What's the point? What's the purpose? So each person has a different reason for being here, but it's all about gathering experience. And I have gathered some experience like Davyd, which is the hard way. Like, whoops, I shouldn't have eaten that, or I shouldn't have tried that. But that's how I learn myself is, let me try it. What effect does it have on me? And I still remember my surprise when I was in naturopathic school to become a physician. The surprise of, that's poisonous. A little bit is useful. A lot, not so useful. Then you have to detox from it. But if I look at myself, there's many layers of purpose. And I think one of the mistakes that we make is trying to winnow it down to just one thing, only here to do one thing. Well, you can do that in a day. And what are you going to do for the rest of your 365 days that year and the other 80, 90, 100 years that you've got to go? There's a new purpose for every day. So it's not something that we can just easily put a label on. And I think as we look at what are we doing here and how are we doing, we have to say, oh dear, we do something different.
Collectively, we know that we're interconnected, and yet, behave if we aren't. As a collective, what are we doing? We're not contributing to, we're working against, as you said, going to war with one another, cutting each other down, killing each other as if life has no meaning. I wonder what the elementals, the nature kingdom, the plants, the spirits of the plants, they must be at a loss to understand us.
Can I share a little story? I don't want to take too much time, but this little story. I was in the beginning of Kundalini when I had unlimited consciousness and was communicating with everything. I'm laying on the dock. I lived on the edge of a bay, and I had a lovely little house. And I'm laying there and kind of, like this, with my chin on my arms. And this little spider comes trotting across the dock and jumps on my arm, and I freaked out. And I was, I normally would have freaked out. So in this mood of total consciousness, or this gift, I looked at the spider and I said, "Hey, who do you think you're walking on?" And he stopped and stood up on his back legs and looked at me. He was only, a few inches from my eyes, and said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then hopped off and went around my arm. And I said to him, and then he came back a minute later. And anyway, in the conversation, I said to him, "Well, really, I'm more afraid of you than you are of me." And he said, "Well, you're pretty big." And I said, "Well, just don't bite me." And he said, "I promise I won't bite you. Just don't squish me." And I said, "Okay, I won't." So I'm laying there another 15, 20 minutes and watching him go back and forth, very carefully going around me. And I close my eyes, and my daughter comes out, and she sits on the dock. She sees that spider, and she squishes it. And, slap on the dock. And I jumped up, bawling my eyes out, instant tears, freaking out, calling her a murderer. She killed my friend, and she was like, "Mother, what happened to you?" And so there's a moment that we begin to recognize our oneness with everything, and that the collective isn't just humans. It's the bugs, it's the birds, it's the plants, it's the soil, it's all the things that live in the soil. It's everything. And we have to reestablish community in that way, with that in mind.
I have to share a story with you. I was in Spain many years ago with my children and a couple of friends and their children. The weather was wonderful. And one night, I think it was the night before we were flying home, we were walking down, by the bay, and there was a big stag beetle, what the Brits call a stag beetle. And there is this story that if you kill a stag beetle, it's going to rain. Old wives' tale. So I turned to my friend and said, "Don't touch that stag beetle because it will rain." And he laughed and he put his foot on it. That night, it started raining so hard that all of the flights were cancelled.
Wow.
And we ended up spending another day there.
Oh, my.
David, what do you hear from the plant kingdom, the elementals, about how we can interface, in a different way with them?
Well, listening to both of your beautiful stories there, and particularly with Penny and the spider, of course, the spider is really the representative of Great Mother Spider, who is the weaver of the web of life, or the web of weird, the thing that is interconnected in the original blueprint crystalline grid. And so what better teacher to drop onto your arm than the spider, I think. And it's when we start to view nature in the way that we should view everything, which is that everything is sacred, every interaction with every other human is sacred, every other being is sacred, and each one of those interactions has the potentiality in the moment, if we are in our heart, to be able to open up us to something magical, something more than the mundane and the 3D. And I think it's really that humans have lost. They've lost the Christ consciousness. They've lost the balance and inner harmony of themselves. And so their world is a reflection of that inner chaos and inner imbalance and inner disconnection. And, I think one of the most important things we are here as human beings to do is to repair and reconnect our DNA. And we can all do this. We've been doing it ourselves in our tribe for several years now, and we can see the effect it's had on our consciousness and our tribe's consciousness, because every time we reconnect part of the DNA, which, by the way, Dandelion is incredibly good at as an intelligence, we start to have these memories come back of other lifetimes, of our primordial dragon selves, of our angelic selves, of our serpent Anunnaki selves, of our feline, lion, Lyran cells, or of many different aspects of our DNA. And I think that is really what the big experiment is about. You know, I've had many questions over the years about what is this world that we're in? And I know listening to some of your conversations, Penny, even with the guys on Beyond Mystic, it's like, wow, are we in a simulation? Is this real? And if so, which bits are real? And if it's a simulation, what are we doing here exactly? And I think we are probably in some sort of sim learning how to be caretakers, guardians of a world, a terraformed world. We've been sharing a lot recently that we are the creators. And particularly we perceive that we've shifted since the April 8th eclipse. We shifted into a new cuboid of the universe, as Jose Arguelles would have called it. And we are perceiving everything that happens from our mind is manifesting so much quicker. And not only is it manifesting so much quicker, and we're seeing this within our tribe, even within people that we watch, so there is telepathic communication going on in the noosphere between many of us who are now collectively making the decisions that are affecting the whole world. Only a small percentage of the population have realized this, but we're seeing it very clearly in the financial markets at the moment with XRP, which has an incredible amount of consciousness being projected at it because it's been some of us understand. This is going to be how wealth is redistributed. Many, many exciting things. And by doing all of this work, I think that we are remembering that we are cosmic human. We can even say Jedi guardians of the universe, and the Earth is our training ground. And if we can master things down here by being interconnected with the web of life, we will remember our true destiny and the real reasons that we came here, not the diminished versions which involve a career and a 9-to-5 job and all of the other BS that we've been fed, but actually a real remembrance through our Christ consciousness, our sixth dimensional consciousness capacity into the greater realms of our own self, which in doing that actually allows us to connect to much bigger oversouls, including the David Spirit of Mother Earth, who is our own consciousness, who has agreed to allow us to be here and assist in this experiment. So once your level of appreciation goes to that much more 5D, 6D level, you start to see everything quite differently, and you see your interactions with everything. Every time I have an interaction with something, there's an intention behind it. There's a carefulness not to destroy, not to harm. And, you know, you reminded me very much, Penny, of that movie 7 Years in Tibet, which is a great book, of course. And there's the scene where I think it's Brad Pitt playing the guy in the movie. And he's with the monks who are building a new monastery, and it's taken them forever because every time they put the spade in the ground, they dig up a worm, and they don't want to kill any of the worms. It takes like 7 years or something like that. And so I'm like, wow, you know, I have to say that not all of the months that I spent time with were quite that conscientious, but in principle, I understand exactly what these beings were showing us, that everything is sacred and we should take care. There is no rush to do anything. The more that we're present in the moment, the longer the day becomes because we achieve more, but also because we're much more present with our environment and it's responding to us. And particularly, I think since April, we've witnessed that times become a lot more stretched, a lot more malleable, a lot more fluid, all of which is, as we understand it, synonymous with the process that we're currently in as a collective, even if the majority of people are not actually aware of that right now.
Yeah. It strikes me that one of the quickest ways to convert everybody and make them understand this is for the elementals and the plants to really start speaking to us. Yes. And for some people like you guys, it's happened. For many others, it's an impossibility. So how can we learn to communicate with them? What do we have to do?
Talk. You know, when a bug comes in the room or some water, let's use an example of your ceiling is leaking. Okay? It maybe drips down the wall or drips through the ceiling. You can stop it and say, look, what are you doing in here? Can I ask you? You know, please don't come this way. Go some other way. And maybe you'll get a reprieve, maybe not. I had some men here that I was having a piece of the ceiling over the kitchen redone, the roof, not the ceiling. And they took the entire roof off, the shingles off and all of that. And lo and behold, we get into this terrible thunderstorm. And I'm in the center of the building. This is a big place. And I don't know what's going on outside at all. And these two workmen come in and they say, oh, we have to stop. It's raining, it's pouring, and, you know, you might get a little bit of damage because we've got the roof off, and here we are, and we don't have any tarps. We weren't counting on any rain. And I was like, what? And I jump up from my computer, and I run all the way through the building, out through the kitchen, and stand on the porch and, you know, shout up at the sky, stop. And it stopped. instantly. And I turned around and I said to the workmen, okay, hurry, get it back together. And the last thing I said to the rain was, please, not until they're done and the ceiling is protected. And there was a little bit of damage in terms of, because everything was soaked. It wasn't just raining, it was pouring. But the workmen were like, is she a witch? That kind of thing. And, from my point of view, we don't reach out with what we need or tell them what we need. The wind is a wonderful friend. The wind will move whole hurricanes when you talk to it and ask it, from my heart, please don't bring that this way. Don't hurt my friends, the trees. Don't hurt the birds. Don't. It's for everybody that you're asking. So I have so many stories I could share, but you just have to start being real with those elements, whether it's the water, the wind, the earth. What do you need, Mom, Mother Earth, etc., etc. So even fire. Oh, don't you touch my house, please. I'm trying to be nice about it, but I would really appreciate it if you don't touch my house. Those kinds of things. So yeah, just start in the middle. There's no perfect way.
Davyd?
Well, I would completely agree with what Penny has just said. And it's interesting that we're tackling this topic right now because we are literally in the process of working with the medicine wheel with our tribe in a process we call Heaven on Earth, which is bringing all of the things that we're talking about down from the higher realms of consciousness where we can communicate with them down into the 3D to do exactly what Penny has just described. Because one of the things we also learned at Tibetan Buddhist school is that in Tibet, in the mountains, the lamas, they would have weather lamas and they would sit and communicate with the wind, with the water, with the sun, the crops to grow. And so we know that this is possible. And many times when I sat in ceremonies, particularly medicine ceremonies, and it would be howling with rain in the depths of everyone's despair at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's all gone crazy and all of the rest of it. Only for at 6 o'clock, for suddenly, the clouds to part, literally just above the teepee. Everywhere else in the area would still be with black clouds. And the sun would break through, literally shining a beacon of light down through the top of the teepee, specifically into the teepee. And I was just like, what are the chances of that at that moment? But it happened so often. And of course, other things happened. UFOs would turn up and all kinds of weird, crazy stuff. But it really turned me on to this idea we can communicate with the elementals. And so then often on retreats, particularly down in the West Country in Britain, when we used to run retreats there, particularly with mugwort, we would have a lot of rain. And so we'd be like, oh, we need to be outside 5 o'clock, Lady Mugwort, for the fire ceremony. If you could just, talk with the water elementals, we need a half an hour window. And you would not believe every single time we did that, the rain would stop for half an hour. And literally to the minute we are given it, it would turn back on again and it would start howling. And people were like, how did you do that? We just ask the water elementals,
So the answer is do it. Just do it.
I think it's do it. And also just to add another story, like similar to what Penny had said about the water.
Actually, I don't think we've got time for that now, Davyd, because we really are out of time now. So in part 2, Penny, Kelly and Davyd Farrell will be discussing food consciousness, nutrition, biodynamic farming, exploring plant communication even more, and dreaming our future into being. In the meantime, you'll find more information about Penny Kelly's books, articles, online courses and consultations, and Davyd's plant transmissions, courses, initiatives and services at their websites, pennykelly.com and quantumplanet.world. That's it. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I hope you'll join us for part 2 of this conversation on Tuesday, January the 1st. We'll see you then.